G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. We're about to have The Outsiders and then First Dog on the Moon.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not. Yes, indeed, and joining you for Outsiders today, editor of The Monthly, Nick Funk, policy analyst for the Centre of Independent Studies, Trish Jar, and marketing guru, Toby Ralph. All hail, Guru.
Good morning.
Morning.
Well, I think we probably are going to talk about budget stuff, are we not? But let's try and broaden it into some issues of consequence. And what I wonder is whether this budget ends this period we've had of the politics of the middle ground.
He is a low-rent, soft cutter of Commonwealth outlays, while a hard and unforgiving cutter of state payments to the states. This is a budget that would seek to demolish the pillars of Australian society: Medicare, education for all, a fair pension, full employment. The very things that this Prime Minister promised not to touch are the first casualties of his fabrications.
There's Opposition Leader Bill Shorten making his budget reply. Nick, is he right? Is this budget mark a shift for Conservative politics over to the right? Yeah. Leaving Labor there with the middle ground to play with.
I think it says a lot about the budget that it actually managed to deal Bill Shorten back into the game. It's the first time he's felt like a sort of vital figure in Australian politics for several months now. I'm not sure if he got a new speechwriter, but he was right on the ground that he wants Labor to be on: health and education, pensioners, poor people. These are issues that the Labor Party would love to talk about, and they were just invited to speak about it.
Which, Tricia, make the politics of the budget really interesting, because it completely creates that opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I wonder if we're not overstating the conservativeness of this budget a little bit. I mean, my political memory isn't particularly long, but weren't people saying the same thing about John Howard in 1996? Maybe it was a bit different then, because, Hawke and Keating had been in power for so long, and so there was a certain amount of exhaustion, I guess, and in contrast, Labor have only been around for 6 years. But, I mean, the first Howard budget was a lot tougher than this one was, and I wonder if it's just being overstated.
Is it a matter, Toby, purely of toughness, or of where that toughness is directed?
It's where it's directed. I don't think it's a particularly tough budget. I mean, they've taken away from a lot of places, but they've also spent money in a lot of new places. Is it dividing the two parties? Yes, but fortunately, of course, we have the middle ground solution of Clive Palmer becoming
what an abundant middle ground that is.
Becoming far more popular. His vote is rocketing up, and that's an alarming thing.
But, look, I think it's a very interesting moment. I mean, that issue of fairness, which is something which the government has been so keen to promote. I mean, hence the debt levy. This is the complete fig leaf for the entire budgetary process. And yet we have no touching, for example, of superannuation tax concessions and the billions of dollars that are held there. We have the strange performance around the Medicare co-payment, with it being siphoned off to cure cancer and Alzheimer's. There's all sorts of weirdnesses about this.
Yeah, well, I think, the reason that it's been badly received, and I think it's pretty fair to say it's been fairly badly received across the community.
Which would have been the expectation.
Well, the expectation was that it would be a tough budget. The strange thing is that over the next 2 or 3 years, the budget bottom line, the overall the overall numbers are not that much different from what the Labor Party was going to deliver according to the Treasury's estimates. So for all the talk of toughness, they don't seem to have won much in terms of the bottom line. The problem is the gap between the rhetoric that they went in with and what the budget actually said. So people were expecting that everyone would have to cop. Everyone would have to tighten their belts. But as it turns out, the only people that really have to tighten their belt are the people that can least afford it. Like you say, company tax is actually going to drop at the very time when more revenue is required in 3 to 4 years, when the major cuts kick in. That's when the deficit levy drops off for high-income earners. How does that make sense?
There are mixed messages, aren't there, Tricia, in that? I mean, and that's perhaps what gives the budget a sense of the ideological over the purely fiscal, that the money isn't there, the money isn't being made, and yet tough cuts are being at the same time implemented.
I think that's true to a certain extent, although I personally am not a big fan of increasing taxes to bring in more revenue. I do think that the cuts could be better targeted. For example, I mean, there's about $10 billion in corporate welfare per year, and only I think 850 million of that has been targeted in the budget. And by comparison, one of the harshest measures we see in the budget was the changes to welfare for under 30s, which apparently only saves about $1.2 billion over 4 years. So I can totally understand where the opprobrium is coming from.
I think there's quite a lot of. It's a symbolic change. You know, I mean, the tax take is going from 23% of GDP up to 25% by 2017, 2018. Yeah. So it's not as if they're actually cutting. We're still in a situation where only 1 in 5 people actually contributes more than they get from the budget, from tax, which that smells wrong to me, you know. If 4 out of 5 people are net beneficiaries and 1 out of 5 is actually losing dough, that suggests to me that tax is still too high and there's still too much middle-class welfare. Now, they started knocking that back, but then they sort of took with one hand and they gave with the other to what appear to be some pretty silly things.
And I mean, that's an interesting thing too. It all depends for the success of the strategy on how well they sell the notion of the problems around the budget. And I'm not sure that that's been so effectively sold. I'm not sure that we're all completely convinced about the state of emergency.
Well, I don't think even the government obviously is not convinced about the budget emergency, because they've embarked on a $20 billion program, a medical research fund, the biggest in the world apparently. Who asked for this? Like, where was the driving force for this? And the money that's being collected from the Medicare co-payment, it's not. I mean, some of it might be going to that, but you can't say on the one hand to people, we really don't have any money. You've got to start paying for your own doctor's bills.
This is before we talk about the likes of school chaplaincy programs, for example.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, you say, but we've actually found $20 billion to put into a medical research fund. Is this an emergency or is it not?
How do we work that out, Trish? I mean, how do we? What is the clear message there between cuts and emergency, and why is that so muddled?
Well, I think part of it is basically just been political expediency. So obviously in the lead up to the last election, the government was kind of carping on about budget emergencies because it suited their purpose, because it made the government look weak or, cowardly or whatever, and made them look like big spenders. So that's part of it. Unfortunately, I actually agree that the budget needs to be brought back into surplus. But, I mean, I think that the thing with the cuts is mostly just that the government, it's quite clear that the government either doesn't take its own rhetoric seriously or thinks that there are other ways of getting around things, with the effect of, I guess, kind of not touching some of the bigger areas of spending and just kind of lobbing the ball to other people.
I mean, there's a challenge for Toby, for Labor in responding to this. I mean, in using that opportunity, if there is one, of being in the centre. I mean, the challenge for them is to come up with an alternative prescription for how you solve what I think we all understand as some basic problems around the budget. And the alternative solution is basically around tax, which is awkward.
It is. I think what's happened here is that there's just been a bit too much exaggeration. I mean, it was true that we were spending $150 million a day more than we were collecting in tax. At what point does that become an emergency? I don't think it's an emergency yet, but it's politically expedient to say so. Do you need to change it? Yes, you do. But if you exaggerate it too much, nobody's going to believe you.
And there's the whole belief thing, of course, Nick, which is a bit of a subtext around this, on promises made and then not necessarily delivered.
Yeah, well, I mean, the health and education cuts, it's been so badly handled. I mean, the fact that they made such a strong promise days before the eleation
of unity ticket on education.
Yeah, well, that was the first mistake. But the second mistake is coming out and announcing the cuts before you want to speak about the revenue. I'll give you an alternative to what they could have done. If, for example, they'd come out and said, the health and education spending is unsustainable. In a few years, it's really going to blow out. So over the next couple of years, let's talk about alternative revenue sources. We're going to have to think about the GST. We've got years to do this. It'll be after the next election. You can vote on it. People would have said, actually, that's a really good idea. People would have said, we're happy to pay more for health and education. And you would have had this issue where you have a sustainable source of revenue, at least a conversation that's mature. In this case, the morning after the budget, the headlines are $80 billion cut out of health and education. They didn't put in brackets 3 years. But how could they have put themselves in this position where they're announcing $80 billion of cuts before they're even ready to talk about revenue?
And what, Tricia, did you make of the Treasurer's body language in communicating that, states, your problem, deal with it?
Oh, I thought it was quite amusing, actually. So his speech in particular, he seemed very kind of awkward and stilted. And I think what was the speech itself was sort of not that interesting. What was more interesting, I thought, was what came after, which was partially the interview with Sarah Ferguson on the ABC, which was quite enjoyable for everybody to watch, to see the Treasurer sweating it out.
That was a remarkable piece of interrogation, and I suspect there will be much more of that to come in the next wee while as this budget process unravels. We've got more of that coming up in a moment, but thank you first to our outsiders this morning who have been editor of the Monthly, Nick Fike, policy analyst for the Centre for Independent Studies, Trish Jarr, and marketing guru Toby Ralph. Did I say more budget? Hello, Patriots. Welcome to First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living. I'm not Walkley Award-winning cartoonist for The Guardian, First Dog on the Moon. It's budget week. What a kerfuffle. We've heard from Treasurer Joe Two Middies, and we've heard from Opposition Leader Shirt Bulging, who gave a rather fiery speech which sounded like he meant it. That was nice for a change. But now it's time to hear from the member for the Moon, with his budget reply. We cross live to Parliament House, Canberra now, and here's the Speaker, Bronwyn Bishop.
I call upon the Honourable Member for the Moon.
Madam Speaker, please don't do this. I would just like to say that there is something in this budget for everyone, as long as you're not young or old or poor or need frivolous things like somewhere to live and clothes to wear while you eat your 2-minute noodles every day for the rest of your life until you die. Basically, if you're doing well now, you'll be fine, and if you're not, well, it's about to get a whole lot harder. Suck rocks, Australia. The age of entitlement is over. Check the Liberal Party website for sections of fine print. Not a lot surprises me about Australia, Madam Speaker. Oh, I get shocked occasionally, or stunned, or amazed. Shocked that this budget contains nothing to prepare for climate change, but not surprised. Amazed that universities will be required to charge whatever they want. Horrified that the Homelessness Prime Minister has taken the axe to services for people with disabilities, mental health, Aboriginal Australia, overseas aid, oh blah blah blah. When am I going to stop whining? I still can't believe Australians actually like chicken salt. I mean, it doesn't even have chickens in it. I was shocked by the budget, Madam Speaker, but I wasn't surprised. You see, it's easy to understand how, as a nation, we're capable of doing all of this terrible stuff to each other, how we live with, say, Manus and Nauru every day. We're pretty racist, small-minded and frightened. We delude ourselves with the myth of mateship and the Anzacs and so on. We tell ourselves, or agree when others tell us, that we believe in the fair go for everyone. It's not true, because if we really believed in a fair go for everyone, everyone would be getting a fair go. Don't tell me Australians aren't resourceful. We are. Look at the Hills Hoist and MasterChef. We could do it, but we don't. We champion things like mandatory detention and pretend it's about stopping the boats. We take a guilty and sometimes not so guilty pleasure in the suffering of others. Listen to Talkback Radio. All right, don't. But trust me, you'll hear plenty of folk happy to call in, one hand down their ideological trousers, to righteously claim with grim enthusiasm that these people have a choice and they don't have to be there. We're not very nice, and not much surprises me about us. And that's why a first dog on the moon government will show leadership and will ban chicken salt. Seriously though, Madam Speaker, I was actually surprised by the budget. Not all of it. Most of it's just the expected budget buying for smug cigar smokers and their plush wives and children. It's an ideological payback budget. It's the revenge budget the Sydney University Liberal Club would have devised as a joke. Targets all of the government's political enemies, including and especially the poor. Cruel, but not unusual. And yet, as I said, I was surprised by one thing, and it was this. No financial support for 6 months at a time for unemployed people under 30. 6 months on, 6 months off, nothing, nada, zip. This is what old cigar-chomping two-middies and his glossy, well-cared-for family believe in. This is what Tony and his government believe in, that if you're unemployed and under 30, you should receive 6 months of absolutely nothing from the government. We're not investing in the future. Boomers are going to eat it and poop it out in expensive marble toilets. And tell me crime rates won't go up. Go on, tell me. This government simply hates poor people getting something for free. It pours off them in waves. It comes right out of the telly. Oh, the age of entitlement isn't over. How did these pompous crew ever get to think they were entitled to treat other people like this? But, jokes aside, this is going to fundamentally change Australian society. It's the biggest change we've seen in years. This will throw a generation under the bus. Poverty is no longer something you're going to hand with surviving and maybe climbing out of. It's your lot. It's your reward for being born who you are. You won't even be able to afford chicken salt. And this is what surprised me. I use the phrase un-Australian a lot, Madam Speaker. I use it as a hilarious, ironic joke because I'm a professional dickhead. I don't think I've ever used it in its proper sense, which I suppose is to describe something that's even below the very low standard we set for ourselves. But I'm using it today. Giving young, unemployed people under 30 no financial support at all is un-Australian. For our many faults, oh, and we have so many. I thought we were better than this. No, I didn't. Good luck, Australia. I love you. This has been First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living, proudly brought to you by the First Dog on the Moon Institute. Now get out there and get a job, you lazy slobs. You're on your own. Earn and learn.
Thanks, Dog. And that's it for the show today.
Well. That was the best First Dog on the Moon episode I've heard all year, actually. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. He didn't have time to mention the $115 million to be ripped out of the CSIRO, causing another 450 job losses from the Commonwealth Scientific Industrial Research Organisation. At the same time, they're setting up a $20 billion medical research future fund to do blue sky research into a cure for all cancer and something to reverse dementia. But they're not going to actually spend that $20 billion on delivering any actual healthcare, which is already known technology as a result of previously conducted research. They're going to take 12 of the $20 billion out of federal health spending. So they rip $12 billion out of the system that's already struggling, and they stick that on the short-term money market. They invest it, they set up a fund, and the fund is supposed to generate interest payments, and the interest payments get used on doing blue sky research into cancer. And that means that all of the scientists and R&D technicians who are losing their jobs all over everywhere else in the budget, they're supposed to feel like they have to not cooperate in complaining about the stupid government policy that's doing this, because they're all going to have their nose down and their bum in the air with their hand turning the grindstone, trying to apply for a job with the Blue Sky Medical Research Future Fund Foundation when it gets set up. In the meantime, they all just get cut off the payroll. The government's not going to do any science. They're not going to have any federal responsibility for overseeing the environment or surveilling compliance with pollution regulations or Murray-Darling Basin water management schemes. They're going to make people pay $7 to go to visit the doctor, and an extra $5 to get your script filled, and an extra $5 to get an x-ray, and an extra $5 for your pathology test. So whereas Joe, the cigar-munching, big, fat, Lebanese, Maronite, Christian, New South Wales politician, likes to say it's only going to be the cost of 2 middies or a third of a packet of cigarettes, what parent would deny their child a visit to the doctor? He hasn't paid attention to the fact that there might be a family of, say, 5 people and they've all got the flu. It beggars imagination. I understand that the cost of healthcare in Australia has been rising at an increasing rate, and it has been rising at an increasing rate because it has become fashionable for people to spend 80 or 90% of the money that goes on their entire life's health care in the final month of their life. It's become almost de rigueur for people to be transferred to an intensive care ward when they can no longer live in a nursing home bed or live at home with a bottle of oxygen. An auntie of mine spent 10 days in an intensive care, and then she died anyway. You know, she was over 80 and she had emphysema. It's sad that people can get to be really old and still have all their marbles and have some systemic failure that means that they're just going to sort of fade out and die from oxygen starvation or cardiac failure. But that would be the natural history of the disease, and if she hadn't had medical care, she probably would have died from the emphysema 5 or 10 years earlier anyway. But no, it's de rigueur to get everybody to have the ultimate in medical care. And instead of saying, oh, well, we're just not going to let people into an intensive care ward for acute on chronic conditions that are otherwise, you know, in their pre-terminal phases. If they said that, they would probably be able to slice about 20% off the entire health budget, because you wouldn't be getting geriatrics with one foot on the grave and the other foot on a banana skin spending a fortnight in intensive care before they die. And the idea of the old people's home is that it's the holding paddock for the town's funeral directors. To take them out of the holding paddock and put them in the intensive care ward is just insane. The idea that it's really, really difficult to get a job when you're over 50 is obviously sunk in because the government's decided that anybody who gives an over 50-year-old who's been on social security for more than 6 months a job will receive $10,000 from the government. Where are they going to get that $10,000? Well, $10,000 is 1.5 times 6 months worth of New Start allowance. So every 1.5 people under 30 who get cut off New Start, the government's going to be able to pay somebody $10,000 to pretend to give a disability support pensioner over 50 a job. I've just heard on background briefing how the New South Wales government has just dismantled the most successful program there's ever been. It's been running for 50 years, and what it does is prevents released prisoners from reoffending and becoming recidivists. And it's been working really, really well, and therefore the New South Wales government has decided, the shock jock said they have to be tough on crime, so they've just dismantled that program. So the jails are full, and Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey want teenagers to starve to death. It's for 6 months. For 6 months they're just going to eat out of garbage tins and sleep in doorways. Well, I guess they're going to feed the homeless to the starving next. They can probably figure they'll turn a profit on that. It is enough to give diarrhoea the shits. Just as First Dog said, it is the most un-Australian lurch to the extreme lunatic fascist right wing that I've heard of anywhere. All because of an alleged budget emergency. that only occurred when Joe Hockey doubled the government debt limit as soon as he came to power. All because he reckoned the Labor Party was so terribly irresponsible. As far as I can understand it, the extreme lunatic right wing of the Liberal Party seems to believe that as an article of Tea Party faith, all government spending is automatically bad and therefore must be cut because the government can only spend taxpayers' dollars and big business doesn't like paying any tax at all. If the government acts to oversight the operations of the business side of the community, that's considered red tape and it should be eliminated. If the government acts to conserve the environment, because we've already trashed 90% of Australia, we've got some of it that's still functional in the national parks, but that's only because it was so far away from anywhere where there was land worth farming or a market that anything that was produced there or could be harvested there was transportable to a marketplace. Well, anyway, no, the business side of the community reckons that they should be allowed to graze and mine and log and shoot in the national parks, because otherwise it's elitist nonsense by environmentalist communist greenies to try and provide some unspoiled refuge for the wildlife of the nation, because the economy is just such a great way to live on a continent. So they say. People were farming this continent for at least 9,000 years before the white fellas got here, and they did it sustainably. And the topsoil rose up to cover the rocks. And it took 2 hours per person per day to get 375 different species of food in a year, and the crowned heads of Europe didn't live that good. So that's why the sheep had to be released and make the free-range tribal aborigines locally extinct everywhere within 5 years of a sheep showing up. And I grew up understanding that paying tax was your licence fee to operate in the economy. If you want to operate in the economy, then you're going to be exploiting an environmental surplus somewhere. Wealth is not materialised out of thin air, it's materialised out of interactions that exploit the environmental surplus. And the environmental surplus belongs to everybody on the earth at the moment. And it also belongs to all their descendants, and we have a responsibility to conserve the environmental surplus so that future generations can exist. At the moment, the people in charge, they have the idea that that's all a lot of greeny hogwash. What they need to do is be allowed to make a profit wherever they can, because if they make a profit, then they'll spend the money and the wealth will trickle down throughout the economy, just like urine down a drunk's leg will finally warm his toes when his socks get wet. And they don't consider that there needs to be any environmental conservation laws or respect for biodiversity, because technology and human ingenuity will solve every problem with progress, just like it always has in the past. When we moved out of Gabatepki in Turkey and the Babylonians sowed the fields with salt and crashed their economy after inventing broadacre agriculture that needed irrigation because they dropped the rainfall when they cut their trees down. And every time they crash the local microclimate and the local microecology, the rich bastards take the accumulated wealth that they've ripped out of the landscape, and in the form of jewellery and gold, they run away. And they pay somebody else to fuck the landscape for their profit further down the road. And now they've run out of Earth. They've gone all around the world and they've met up at the far end, and now the whole Earth is degraded. But all along the way, there has been this compact that it's cheaper to pay the dole than it is to rebuild the town square and the marketplace after food riots. And if you don't pay the disaffected, depressed, unemployed young, and the unemployables, the people who just don't fit anywhere in the economy because nobody can figure out how to make a profit out of paying them to do anything, and it's cheaper to not lock them up and have to pay, $300 a day to keep them in jail. If you can you know, get them to live on $25 a day on the dole for just eking out an existence and not breaking any laws. That is the cheaper option. But no, that would mean paying tax. That would mean accepting that there is a responsibility within the community to make sure that if somebody is getting rich and going to bed fat and hungry, then nobody else starves. Right? If an Aborigine went out and collected 100 wild native parsnips and brought them back to the campsite, they had to give away 90 of them. And nobody went to bed hungry. Now these people are whinging and bitching and moaning about 25 to 47% personal income tax, 25% corporate tax. They want the rights of being a technical legal corporate citizen, but they don't like paying tax for it. And 10% GST. Oh no, they don't like that. They don't like the idea that they get to work and the pensioners and the unemployed get paid enough to pay to keep the laws of the land. They want to break that compact. They want there to be large numbers of disaffected people who have nothing to lose. And when you think of what Heinlein said, that a human being who has missed 7 meals is ready to kill. That's what Joe Hockey and Tony Abbott want to unleash on the Australian landscape. Is cranky, pissed off people who are ready to kill. And the only reason I can see they want to do it is because they're planning on issuing contracts to their mates in the private security guard industry to have concentration camps full of Australian dissidents, undesirables and designated unemployables. And no doubt when they come out of government, they'll get a job working for or lobbying for the concentration camp industry with which they plan to grow the economy. Shit, a bugger bitch bum cunt fuck poo. They're gonna fuck this country. They really are. When I was a little lad, the 1960s that would be, as the old man was showing me how to live, it never occurred to me that as I watched and I grew and the changes went on, so the world I was learning to live in had gone. But the old man, you see, he was 52 summers older and wiser than me. So I remember what Australia was supposed to be when they were building it, and it's really pissing the shit off out of me to watch these clowns turn it into a cross between Hitler's Germany and President Botha's white South Africa. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.